Today, we are going to follow a very touching story titled, The Son Who Was Denied His Inheritance and His Remarkable Transformation. Please support me so I can continue creating more meaningful videos. Without further ado, let's dive right into the story. John was a self-made millionaire, a man who overcame countless hardships to build his career from the ground up. With the massive wealth he had accumulated, most people assumed John would be incredibly satisfied and proud of his life. However, the thing that weighed most heavily on his mind was not business or money, but his only son, Wick. Wick grew up surrounded by luxury, living in wealth and abundance. From a young age, he received everything he wanted without having to put in much effort. The things that others had to earn through sweat and tears came to Wick as easily as unwrapping a gift. This privileged lifestyle not only made him arrogant but also shaped him into someone practical, even cold and stubborn. Wick only cared about what could bring him direct benefit, while everything else seemed meaningless to him. Over time, this created a gap between Wick and those around him, as he found it difficult to connect emotionally with people outside his immediate interests. What worried John most about Wick wasn't his ability. In fact, Wick was intelligent and naturally talented in business. He had a sharp mind, exceptional analytical skills, and a knack for seizing opportunities quickly. If it were only about logic and efficiency, Wick would be the perfect choice to take over the family business. However, what he severely lacked was the ability to understand and empathize with others. Wick's emotional intelligence was close to zero, and he never cared about the feelings of those around him, nor did he grasp how his actions could affect them. This absence of empathy made John increasingly concerned, fearing that Wick might drive people away and even sabotage his own success. When John saw Wick growing older and developing management skills, he decided to let him try out the position of temporary chairman of the corporation. John hoped this experience would help Wick realize the importance of responsibility, leadership, and the impact of compassionate guidance. But things didn't go as John had hoped. Wick's management style caused significant unrest in the company. With his practical nature and lack of empathy, Wick implemented rigid policies focused primarily on profit and efficiency, without considering the emotions or needs of the employees. He slashed budgets in departments he deemed non-essential, reduced benefits, and increased workloads, believing that these steps would boost productivity and the bottom line. However, these actions left employees feeling devalued and even exploited, creating a tense and resentful atmosphere in the workplace. The seasoned members of the company, who had been loyal to John for years, were disheartened by Wick's disregard for their welfare. They felt the absence of John's compassionate leadership and began to question their dedication to the company. From the very first days, Wick implemented a series of cost-cutting measures, including reductions in employee benefits that the company had traditionally offered. To Wick, benefits and perks were unnecessary expenses that only drained financial resources without directly contributing to profits. He believed that as long as the company's profits increased, it would grow stronger and more successful, so he didn't hesitate to place increased work pressure on employees, expecting this would push them to work harder and help the company achieve its highest profit targets. However, this approach quickly triggered a wave of discontent throughout the company, affecting not only new employees but also the veteran staff who had long been loyal to the corporation. In meetings, numerous employees began to speak up, openly expressing their dissatisfaction with Wick's new policies. They felt exploited, deprived of the respect and rights that the company had previously prioritized. Discontented sighs and whispers of frustration started spreading throughout the offices, corridors, and even on the company's internal forums. Some employees didn't hold back from criticizing Wick directly, describing him as a leader who lacked empathy and focused solely on profits without acknowledging the dedication and struggles of the employees working under him. This criticism and growing discontent transformed the work environment from a collaborative space into a tense and increasingly hostile atmosphere, where people no longer felt appreciated or valued for their contributions. The seasoned members of the company, those who had stood by John through countless challenges and had helped build the corporation's current success, couldn't hide their disappointment. They had once believed that Wick would inherit and uphold the values that John had established, continuing to foster the company's spirit of unity that had been cultivated from its earliest days. However, with Wick's rigid policies and cold management style, many of these veteran employees felt disoriented and lost their pride in working under his leadership. Some even began to consider leaving the company, as they no longer wished to work in an environment where their rights were disregarded and their contributions went unrecognized. The persistent wave of negative feedback eventually reached John's ears, and he found himself unable to ignore it. Gradually, he realized that Wick's issues went beyond a lack of empathy. There was a major gap in his leadership abilities. Wick failed to understand that building a resilient and sustainable company required more than just profit numbers. A business can only thrive in the long term when it fosters loyalty, trust, and a sense of belonging among its employees. These people are the true foundation and driving force that help a company overcome challenges and grow. Without fair treatment and deserved recognition, employees would have no reason to remain committed to the organization. John's concern for the future of the company grew as he contemplated what would happen if Wick continued leading in this manner. He realized that if Wick didn't change, not only would the company face significant difficulties, but the relationship between father and son could also be severely strained. Wick failed to grasp that running a large enterprise wasn't solely about managing finances or increasing profits. It also required genuine care for the individuals who were dedicating themselves day in and day out to the corporation's success. John knew that Wick's rigid perspective on leadership was not just damaging to the morale of the employees but was also placing the legacy of the entire corporation at risk. A company is more than profit margins and productivity metrics. It is a collective of people working together toward a shared goal, a culture cultivated through respect, mutual support, and acknowledgement of each individual's role. This situation only reinforced John's belief that if Wick continued to maintain his cold and pragmatic mindset, he would eventually drive himself to failure. John knew that his son was not lacking in ability, but his rigid management skills and lack of empathy were a dangerous liability. Thus, John decided that it was time for Wick to truly experience life's challenges without relying on power or wealth, so that he might learn valuable lessons about the importance of human values. Wick had no empathy for those in lower social classes. In his view, as long as one had money, one could attain everything: success, status, and respect. To Wick, those who struggled were in that position because they lacked skill or the drive to succeed, and their failures were inevitable. He looked down on the poor, and for him, concepts like compassion or sharing were distant, impractical notions without real-world value. John had often tried to sit down with Wick to share the life lessons he had learned through years of hardship. He recounted the difficult times when he had to work tirelessly, the painful failures he endured on the path to building his success. John hoped to impart to Wick that life was not only about wealth but also about how we treat others, about empathy and kindness. But these lessons seemed to have little impact on Wick. Wick maintained an attitude of arrogance and excessive self-confidence. He believed that his father's accomplishments were the result of John's own abilities and required no help from others. Wick convinced himself that he, too, could achieve the same, perhaps even surpassing his father's success. However, John understood that life was far more complex than his son realized. He worried that one day, Wick's stubbornness and lack of respect toward others would come at a high price. This growing concern made John feel even more compelled to intervene. After many sleepless nights of contemplation, John decided it was time to teach Wick a real lesson about the true value of life. He realized that only first-hand experiences could change Wick's outlook. So, he devised a bold plan, a challenge that he hoped would help Wick understand the genuine meaning of compassion and sharing. One morning, John called Wick into his office. Looking at his son with a stern gaze, he said, "Do you want to inherit the family fortune?" Wick, with a confident and slightly arrogant smile, assumed this was the moment his father would finally acknowledge that he was ready to take over the family business. But John wasn't finished. He continued, "To inherit it, you'll need to complete a challenge. Wick raised his eyebrows in surprise. A challenge? He hadn't expected his father to impose such a condition. The challenge John set out sounded simple, but it was no small feat for someone with Wick's personality. John explained that Wick would have to live and work like an ordinary laborer, helping people in difficult circumstances for an entire month. If he failed to complete this, he would not receive the inheritance. At first, Wick was irritated and couldn't understand why his father was being so strict. To him, helping others was not his responsibility, and he viewed the prospect of doing manual labor as humiliating. Wick couldn't comprehend why a millionaire like his father placed such importance on concepts like compassion and sharing, values he regarded as impractical and meaningless. The idea of sacrificing his comfortable life to endure what he saw as a meaningless task felt both unnecessary and degrading. Wick saw no benefit in lowering himself to work for others, especially people he believed hadn't worked hard enough to change their situations. Wick tried to persuade his father with practical reasoning, arguing that he could donate a large sum of money to charity instead of personally doing what he saw as menial work. He insisted that the money would help far more people and produce a greater impact. But John was unmoved. He explained that what he wanted Wick to experience could not be bought with money, and that truly stepping into the life of a laborer would teach him things that books and theories could never convey. Reluctantly, Wick eventually agreed to the challenge, unwilling to lose his inheritance. He thought to himself that, after all, a month would pass quickly, and then he could return to his normal life. Yet, he had no idea that the coming days would change his life forever. With a hardened heart, Wick began the challenge, approaching it as a mere temporary task. He mentally prepared himself to face work that he considered beneath his status, clinging to his belief that no one could truly change him. He was certain that, no matter what, he would emerge from this month exactly as he had been before. What Wick didn't realize was that this challenge would touch the hidden corners of his soul, forcing him into situations he had never imagined and confronting him with emotions he'd never experienced. This journey would lead him to understand the lesson his father had been trying to impart his entire life, that not everything in life can be measured by money. And so, Wick's journey began, a journey that would open up new horizons, making him face unanticipated challenges and transforming his perspective on the value of life in ways he could never have foreseen. As he took his first steps, Wick was entirely unaware that each day of this journey would be a step closer to a profound change in his heart and his understanding of what truly mattered. With each task and each interaction, Wick would be tested, confronted by the realities of a life so different from his own. On the first day of his challenge, Wick met Nat, a dedicated social worker, a woman with a heart of gold and boundless compassion for those less fortunate. Nat knew nothing of Wick's background. To her, he was simply a new volunteer needing guidance. With her humble appearance and eyes that shone with determination, Nat quickly revealed her deep commitment to her work. She was never hesitant to do the physical tasks that others might shy away from, a trait that astonished many, including Wick. Upon seeing Wick arrive, Nat immediately assigned him tasks that she knew were less than comfortable, carrying heavy boxes of food supplies, distributing meals to the homeless, and moving relief goods into storage. She explained each process in meticulous detail, from how to stack the boxes carefully to prevent them from toppling to the importance of being gentle and attentive when handing out meals. To Nat, each meal, each bottle of water needed to be accompanied by respect, a smile, and a look of understanding. Watching her attention to these small details, Wick was both surprised and somewhat irritated, feeling that all this was unnecessarily fussy and time-consuming. Beyond food distribution, Nat also handled other strenuous tasks without hesitation. Every day, she carried box after box into the storage area, carefully organizing each item so that others could easily access what they needed. Wick observed her lifting heavy boxes, sleeves rolled up, exposing calloused hands that had clearly endured much labor. Yet there was no sign of fatigue on her face. She was equally attentive to the needs of those around her, often bringing coffee or water to her co-workers, especially the elderly and women in challenging circumstances. In her eyes, these small gestures were not trivial, they were a way to create joy and foster connection with others. As Wick observed Nat, he began to realize that this was not merely a job for her. She seemed to approach each task with a sense of purpose and commitment that was foreign to him. Wick had been raised to believe that efficiency and profit were the ultimate goals, so seeing Nat's devotion to the well-being of others seemed both perplexing and, in a way, humbling. To Wick, tasks like these held no value and only dirtied his hands. However, out of respect for his commitment to his father, he reluctantly continued. Though uncomfortable, he couldn't help but notice Nat's dedication and perseverance. Beneath her simple appearance was a heart brimming with warmth and a steadfast determination. Nat was the type of person who always seemed to be there to comfort and encourage anyone in need. Slowly, Wick began to realize that Nat was not just someone doing charity work, she was a source of strength and solace for so many. One day, while they were distributing food to the homeless in the park, Wick watched as Nat paused beside an elderly man. She knelt down, listening intently to his story with respect and compassion. She didn't show any signs of impatience, even though a line of people waited behind them. Wick felt a twinge of irritation, wondering why she was taking so long. Noticing his expression, Nat explained gently, they don't just need food or shelter, they need respect and someone to listen. Their stories can teach us more than any book ever could. For the first time, Wick felt a stirring of surprise. He began to reconsider the values he had always pursued. Though he couldn't fully grasp it yet, a small part of him began to question whether life was really all about money and power. One afternoon, as they were busy distributing food, Wick accidentally stepped on the tail of a stray dog. Startled, the dog turned around, eyes flashing with anger, and immediately lunged at him. Wick froze, barely having time to react as the dog growled, fur bristling, ready to attack. In that tense moment, Nat stepped in without hesitation, shielding Wick from the dog's fury. The aggressive dog bit into Nat's arm, drawing blood from her wound. Though clearly in pain, Nat remained calm and turned to Wick with a reassuring smile. "It's all right," she said softly, "just a small wound." Doing this work means being ready to face any situation to protect others. Her words, spoken with such quiet resilience, struck Wick deeply. It was the first time he witnessed someone willingly put themselves in harm's way to protect another, even a stranger. He was beginning to understand that Nat's strength wasn't in her physical actions, but in the compassion and courage she carried within her. Wick couldn't hide his anger. He raised his voice, declaring that this dog was a danger and needed to be taken to an animal shelter to prevent it from harming anyone else. But Nat immediately intervened, gently shaking her head. She explained that locking up the dog would only bring unnecessary suffering, especially since it hadn't done anything wrong in this situation. Wick, unable to comprehend Nat's compassion, replied with frustration, "It just bit you. Why are you being so forgiving?" Nat responded with a calm smile. "It only reacted that way because it was hurt. We'd probably do the same thing if we were in its place." Initially, Wick didn't understand her reasoning. But later, he learned that the dog belonged to a homeless man who was blind and wandered the park frequently. The dog wasn't just a pet, it was the man's eyes, his only companion, guiding him around and helping him find food. Nat explained that this dog wasn't merely an animal, it was the man's hope, his comfort in a lonely existence. Upon hearing this, Wick felt a strange sensation inside, a hint of regret for his hasty reaction. For the first time in his life, Wick realized that he had been wrong, not because of a failed task or a missed profit margin, but because he had lacked empathy. He sat in silence, his heart weighed down as he reflected on Nat's words. The image of the frail, blind man leaning on his loyal dog as his last source of support began to form in his mind. Wick had always thought that poverty was a result of a lack of effort, but now, as he pictured this man living each day in darkness, isolated, with only a small, loyal friend by his side, Wick felt his heart soften. The realization settled over him slowly, but deeply. Life was far more complex than he ever allowed himself to believe, and everyone carried struggles that couldn't simply be solved by money or dismissed with indifference. A new, vague yet profound feeling began to stir within Wick. He was moved by the simple, enduring friendship between man and animal, but even more so by the warmth of care and concern that people could offer each other in the simplest of ways. These seemingly small acts of kindness, companionship, or even just a gentle touch from a dog now seemed precious and sacred in his eyes. Wick had never imagined that life could hold meaning through such simple and ordinary gestures. He glanced over at Nat, who was gently bandaging her hand after the dog bite, and realized that she embodied a compassion he had never fully understood. Nat didn't expect any reward for helping others. She simply felt joy in seeing others safe and at peace, whether it was a person or even a stray dog left behind. Wick felt his soul stir, feeling regret not only for wanting to send the dog to a shelter but also for his own insensitivity. Never before had the world around him seemed so full of meaning, where people could rely on each other even in life's simplest, most unassuming moments. He began to wonder if he, too, could find joy and solace in such small things. This feeling wasn't just regret, it was a profound awakening within himself. Wick understood that sometimes, the most valuable things weren't found in material wealth or power, but in genuine emotions and connections that required no money. In that moment, he began to reconsider all the things he had once overlooked or dismissed as unimportant. He thought of his father and the lessons he had tried so hard to impart, that life wasn't just about achieving greatness, but also about how we connect with those around us, how we share with one another, and even how we show love to the smallest creatures in our world. This awakening was unlike anything Wick had ever felt, as he realized the richness that lay in simple connections and the humility needed to truly appreciate life's quiet, meaningful moments. Wick sighed, his mind swirling with questions about his own worth and values. He realized that in his relentless pursuit of success, he had lost sight of the simplest things, and now, sitting in the park with Nat and the stray dog, he felt a fragile yet warm sense of peace entering his heart for the first time. The more Wick worked alongside Nat, the more he recognized that her work was far from simple. Beyond distributing food and carrying boxes, Nat took on tasks that most people would overlook. She patiently helped elderly individuals regain their ability to walk, massaging their tired feet, and sometimes even tending to wounds and caring for the sick among the homeless. She performed all these tasks with a gentle smile, showing neither exhaustion nor irritation. Nat also took time to prepare small gifts for children from underprivileged families. She carefully selected toys, books, and clothes, wrapping each item with care so that the children would feel joy and happiness upon receiving them. Wick couldn't help but be amazed at how Nat put so much love and dedication into these tasks, despite knowing that she would receive nothing in return. Outside of her work hours, Nat would visit families in need around the community, taking the time to listen to their stories, offering a kind word, and even helping them seek temporary jobs if possible. For the first time, Wick witnessed a life not built on material wealth or personal gain, but on connection and empathy. Nat's actions prompted Wick to look inward and realize that some things in life simply couldn't be bought. Nat's approach to life and work seemed so foreign to Wick, who had always seen value through the lens of monetary worth. Observing her, he began to grasp that life could be richer when shared, that the smallest gestures of kindness could be the greatest treasures. She made him understand that true fulfillment came not from acquiring more but from giving more. This was a realization that shook his core, challenging every belief he had held. Sitting beside Nat, Wick found himself rethinking his own goals, wondering if he, too, could live a life so filled with purpose and selflessness. It dawned on him that the very things he had dismissed or undervalued might hold the real meaning of success and happiness. For the first time, Wick was inspired to embrace something beyond himself, to strive not for wealth or recognition but for a deeper connection to the people and world around him. Each day working alongside Nat, Wick witnessed life stories that he had never imagined before. Different lives gradually unfolded before his eyes, like silent but painful wounds of society. These stories weren't just tales, they were haunting experiences that forced Wick to confront an entirely different world, one where people were struggling with pain and despair they couldn't overcome on their own. One day, Nat and Wick visited a middle-aged woman living in a cramped apartment. When Nat knocked on the door and introduced Wick as a new helper, the woman gave a slight nod without a word. Her eyes were empty, like a deep, dark void filled with despair. Once inside, Wick noticed the room was barren, devoid of any signs of joy or life. In one corner of the room lay a small picture frame, face down. Nat picked it up, revealing a photograph of a young boy, around 8 or 9 years old, with a bright, beaming smile. With a raspy, broken voice, the woman began to share the story of her son, who had passed away. That boy had been everything to her joy, her source of comfort in an otherwise difficult life. But then a car accident took him away. The shock of losing her son plunged her into an unending spiral of depression. Each day passed in a blur of sorrow, as she clung to memories, unable to escape the relentless pain of losing her beloved child. She had even lost her will to eat, merely wishing that time would pass quickly so she could be reunited with him in the next world. As Wick listened, he felt a heavy ache in his heart. He had never experienced such loss, but looking at the hollow gaze of the mother, he sensed the profound loneliness and haunting void in her soul. Wick had never realized that life could be so cruel, capable of pushing someone into an abyss of darkness without any way out. Sitting there, Wick felt both small and humbled. He understood, perhaps for the first time, the depths of human suffering that couldn't simply be fixed or forgotten. The resilience it must have taken for her to live each day with that unbearable grief left him shaken. Wick's understanding of life was expanding in ways he had never expected. He began to see that behind each face he encountered, there could be stories of silent battles and enduring pain, and that, perhaps, there was much more to life than he had ever allowed himself to acknowledge. Another day, Nat and Wick received word of 2 twin brothers who had been abused by their biological father and had run away from home. When Wick met the 2 children at a shelter, he couldn't help but feel heartache upon seeing their timid demeanor and sorrowful eyes. The older boy bore a bruise on his face, while the younger one's arms and legs were bandaged. Nat gently started a conversation with them, and gradually, the boys began to share the story of their alcoholic father. Whenever he drank, he would beat them without reason. On one occasion, in a drunken rage, he broke the younger boy's arm and threatened to abandon them if they told anyone. Unable to endure it any longer, the brothers had sneaked away in the dead of night, terrified and desperate, seeking refuge at the shelter. Wick couldn't comprehend how a father could be so cruel to his own children. Looking at the 2 boys, he felt a deep pang of sadness and pain. The innocence and carefree nature that should have characterized their age had been replaced by fear and guardedness. Wick realized that some children, from the moment they were born, faced injustices and profound wounds they had no way of escaping. He understood now that his own life had been one of fortune and safety, while these children faced an uncertain tomorrow, not knowing if they would ever find a safe place to call home again. This encounter weighed heavily on Wick. He felt a strange responsibility toward these 2 boys, wanting to shield them from the cruelty of the world. Witnessing their suffering, Wick was forced to confront the reality of how deeply unfair life could be for some, and the harsh truth that not everyone was afforded the same security and protection he had always taken for granted. This experience began to stir a sense of empathy within him, one that he hadn't known before, as he pondered the resilience it took for these children to survive each day in a world that had only offered them hardship. One time, Nat took Wick to meet a boy around 14 or 15, thin and sun-darkened, with weary eyes that spoke of a hard life. The boy worked tirelessly from early morning until late at night, scraping together whatever small amount he could to help his family survive. Ashi's family was so poor that sometimes their meals consisted of just a few grains of rice with a bit of fish sauce. Each day, he went to bus stations or construction sites, looking for any kind of labor he could find, carrying loads, cleaning, or serving. Often, he worked until he was exhausted, yet still didn't earn enough for a proper meal. When Nat asked about his dreams, the boy simply gave a sad smile and replied, "I don't have any dreams, ma am. I just want to have food tomorrow and for my mother to suffer less." The simplicity of his words left Wick speechless. Here was a boy who should have been in school, playing and enjoying life as other children his age did, yet he was burdened with the responsibility of supporting his family. Wick felt a sharp pang of sorrow. For this boy, life was nothing more than a daily struggle for survival, with no concept of a future or dreams. These stories unfolded before Wick as like painful portraits of life's harsh realities. He began to understand that the world was far from the glamorous, material-driven place he had once thought. There were countless people out there fighting to survive in circumstances of intense hardship, living in scarcity and bearing silent, indescribable pain. Though he kept his feelings to himself, each story left an indelible mark on Wick's heart. He began to truly feel the suffering and injustice that he had never noticed before. Wick realized that not everyone was as fortunate as he had been, and that wealth and power could never erase the pain and loss endured by these people. Each encounter chipped away at the walls he had built around his heart, opening his eyes to a world he had been blind to, a world filled with silent endurance and resilience in the face of relentless hardship. Wick's view of life was changing. He understood now that human lives could not simply be measured in terms of success or failure, and that true worth went beyond material possessions. These experiences made Wick rethink his life and the values he had always pursued. He began to understand that sometimes, all it takes is a hug, a comforting word, or a compassionate look to offer hope to those struggling with hardships. Wick felt a lightness in his heart, as if the suffering of others had taught him to slow down, to appreciate simple things, and to realize that success is not only about grand achievements but also about how we treat others, about the ability to share and understand. With each day working alongside Nat, Wick began to grasp lessons he had previously ignored. He saw that success could not solely be measured by wealth or power but also by how we interact with and give to those around us. The people he once looked down upon now became figures of strength and perseverance. They lacked material wealth but were rich in kindness and compassion. These experiences gradually transformed Wick. He no longer saw his tasks as a tedious sequence of obligations. Instead, he found deep meaning in the smallest actions. Simple tasks like carrying boxes, distributing food, or talking with the elderly made him feel connected and closer to people. Wick looked at Nat with new eyes, filled with respect and admiration. The woman he once thought of as weak and naive had become a role model, teaching him about compassion and patience. He began to wonder if he could one day become like her, someone willing to give without expecting anything in return, someone whose strength lay not in material power but in the quiet resilience of the heart. After 2 months of working with Nat, Wick began to feel overwhelmed by the sudden change in his environment. From a life of luxury and comfort, he now faced physically demanding work and heartbreaking stories every day. Initially, he saw this work as just a temporary challenge, but over time, the monotony, exhaustion, and emotional toll began to wear him down, making him feel both physically and emotionally drained. He often felt engulfed by the pain and misfortune of the people Nat helped, and that weight gradually chipped away at his resilience. The fatigue made Wick increasingly irritable, quick to anger, and he found it harder to control himself. There were days when the repetitive tasks drove him to the edge, and even a small mishap could cause him to snap, lashing out at those around him, even at those who tried to help. Though he was aware of this negative change in himself, Wick seemed unable to manage his emotions, trudging through each day, trying to push forward without acknowledging the complex feelings that were weighing him down. One afternoon, after a long day of distributing food to the homeless, Nat prepared a pot of hot soup for everyone to share and warm themselves. Seeing Wick sitting in a corner, looking visibly tired, Nat approached him with a bowl of soup, gently suggesting he rest and relax a little. But Wick, already burdened by stress and pressure, found himself unable to control his reaction. He frowned at Nat, saying he didn't need her concern, and in his frustration, he accidentally knocked the bowl out of her hands. The hot soup spilled, scalding Nat's arm and causing her visible pain. In that moment, Wick froze, realizing the depth of his actions. He hadn't intended to hurt her, yet his own unchecked emotions had led him to hurt someone who was only trying to help him. In that moment, Wick realized his mistake. He stood frozen, unsure of how to react. He watched as Nat tried to hold back her pain, saying nothing as she quietly walked away. Deep down, Wick felt an overwhelming sense of guilt and disappointment in himself. He hadn't intended for his momentary anger to hurt someone else, especially not someone who had been so dedicated to helping him throughout this time. That night, Wick couldn't sleep. The image of Nat's reddened arm and her look of disappointment haunted him, pulling him into a spiral of self-blame and remorse. The following morning, when he arrived at work, Nat wasn't there. On the table, she had left a small note, "Wick, you don't need to accompany me anymore. I don't think this job is suitable for you." Wick couldn't erase from his mind the image of Nat quietly walking away with her reddened arm after the hot soup had spilled. The regret filled him completely, making him feel suffocated by the weight of his own actions. He spent the night tossing and turning, replaying the moment he had lost control and behaved rudely toward Nat, someone who had always been gentle and selfless with everyone. Wick had never felt such profound guilt and disappointment in himself. He realized he hadn't just hurt her physically but had damaged the trust that Nat had placed in him throughout this journey. This experience marked a turning point for Wick. The next morning, when Wick arrived at work, Nat was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was a note left behind, written in short but cold words, "Wick, you don't need to come with me anymore. I don't think this job is suitable for you." Reading those words, Wick felt as if a sharp pain pierced his chest. He realized that Nat was truly disappointed, not only in his actions but in the way he had approached this challenge. She had hoped he would change, that he would learn patience and compassion from this work, but he had let her down. Determined to make things right, Wick decided he had to see Nat immediately to apologize. He couldn't bear the thought of her seeing him as a heartless, irresponsible person. He went straight to the hospital where Nat was being treated for her burn. When he entered her room, he saw her sitting quietly, looking out the window, a hint of sadness on her face. Her hands, which had once been so strong in helping others, were now wrapped in white bandages. Taking a deep breath, Wick stepped in, feeling a knot of tension at the thought of facing her. He lowered his head and spoke in a voice full of sincerity and remorse. "Nat, can you forgive me? I am truly sorry for what happened. I didn't mean to hurt you, but I was under too much pressure, and I lost control. That was my fault. I'm so very sorry." Nat didn't reply. She looked at him with a cold expression, as if she were weighing something in her mind. The silence made Wick feel even more anxious. He continued, his voice shaky and pleading. "I understand if you don't want to work with me anymore. I deserve that. But please, let me make amends. I will cover all the medical expenses and do whatever I can to make up for what I've done. I just ask, please give me a chance to make it right." Wick looked into Nat's eyes and saw the sadness and disappointment that filled them. He could feel that the trust she had once placed in him had been shaken. She had believed that he would change, that her kindness and sincerity would awaken something good within him. But his actions had forced her to reconsider that belief. Finally, Nat sighed, her voice gentle yet filled with a sense of distance. "Wick, I'm not sure if you truly understand the meaning of this work. Volunteering is not just about responsibility, it's about compassion, patience, and understanding others. Yesterday, you didn't just hurt me, you damaged the trust one had placed in you. To me, helping others isn't a burden, it's a joy, a happiness. But with you. I'm not sure if you can feel that." Her words struck Wick like a knife, leaving him speechless. He knew she was right. All these days, he had only seen this work as a challenge to be overcome, never truly understanding or appreciating its value. The truth of her words hurt more than any reproach could have. "Nat, I am truly sorry for hurting you," Wick repeated, his voice almost choking. I know I was selfish and thoughtless. I let my ego get in the way and ended up hurting others. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but please, give me a chance to make things right. Nat looked at Wick for a moment, then she nodded slightly, a sign that she accepted his apology, though without fully forgiving him. She spoke softly. If you want to make amends, start by learning to control yourself, by learning to respect this work. This work isn't for those who lack patience and respect. If you genuinely want to change, then show me that through your actions. Her words left Wick humbled, realizing that his journey to redemption had only just begun. He knew now that words alone were insufficient. He would have to demonstrate his commitment to change through patience, humility, and genuine compassion. Wick nodded, knowing that Nat had given him a precious opportunity to make things right. He looked at her with respect and gratitude. Though he still felt the weight of regret, Wick understood that from this point on, every step he took had to be grounded in humility and sincerity. He didn't want to betray Nat's trust again. Over the 6 months that Wick worked alongside Nat, John secretly observed every step of his son's progress. He had high hopes for this challenge, but he wasn't entirely sure if it would be enough to change someone who had grown accustomed to luxury and pragmatism. Yet, little by little, the reports he received painted a picture of a very different Wick. Once a person who viewed everything through the lens of materialism and self-interest, Wick was gradually becoming more understanding, patient, and considerate of others. John noticed the smallest details like how Wick began to smile when handing out food, how he managed his anger by quietly taking a sweet from his pocket, or how he willingly helped his co-workers without hesitation. These small yet powerful changes showed that Wick had truly entered a new phase in his life. During those weeks of observing, John felt increasingly reassured as he saw his son not only passing the test of endurance but also the test of character. Wick was no longer the self-centered young man focused solely on himself and his power. He had transformed into someone capable of empathy and genuine care for others. Many times, John wanted to go to his son personally, to witness the change firsthand. But he patiently waited, wanting Wick to complete the challenge in its entirety without his presence influencing the outcome. As the weeks passed, Wick's growth became undeniable. It was clear that he had embraced a new understanding of what it meant to lead in life, based on values that went beyond wealth and success. After 6 months, John decided it was time to speak directly with both Wick and Nat, to offer them the rewards they deserved and to express his deep gratitude. He sent an invitation for them to come to the company office on a Monday morning. When Wick entered his father's office, he felt a bit anxious. He wasn't sure how John had observed and assessed his efforts over the past months. Nat, seated beside him, was also slightly nervous, though she tried to calm herself. She didn't know what John would say, but she hoped that Wick's transformation would be recognized. Once they were both seated, John entered with a warm smile. He looked at his son, who was now so different from the arrogant, cold young man he once was. In Wick's eyes, John saw a calmness and maturity that he had long hoped for. With a steady, proud voice, John spoke. Wick, I have been watching you throughout this time, and I am very proud of you. You have completed this challenge not only with your ability but also with your heart. Your transformation has exceeded all my expectations. I know that what you endured was not easy, but you committed yourself to it, and today I am confident that you are truly worthy of inheriting this legacy. Hearing his father's words, Wick felt a lump in his throat. He had never imagined that one day he would hear such loving and proud words from his father. He lowered his head, his eyes shining with happiness and gratitude. For the first time, he felt that he truly deserved the position his father was entrusting to him. John didn't stop with his words for Wick. He turned to Nat, his gaze filled with affection and gratitude. Smiling gently, he said, Nat, thank you for being by Wick's side during this time. You didn't just help him change, you taught him lessons that I believe I could never have taught him in my lifetime. You are a young woman with a compassionate heart and incredible courage, qualities I deeply admire and cherish. I don't just see you as Wick's companion in this journey, but as a member of our family. He would be truly honored to have a daughter-in-law like you." Hearing John's words, Nat felt overwhelmed, her eyes shimmering with emotion. She hadn't expected that what she had done, from her sincerity and genuine kindness, would be so deeply acknowledged and appreciated by Wick's father. For her, helping Wick change and guiding him toward understanding life's deeper values had been her most meaningful accomplishment. But John didn't stop there. He knew that to ensure the beautiful values that Nat and Wick had built together didn't end here, he needed to take further action to spread those values to many others. He announced that, moving forward, the company would allocate a significant budget for promoting and supporting the organization where Nat worked, encouraging the community to come together to help those in need. John believed that the compassion Nat had brought into Wick's life was something not only worthy of recognition but also of wider influence, so that more people would have the opportunity to learn about and participate in charitable activities. John went even further, deciding to dedicate 50% of his retirement fund to build a new healthcare facility at the very location where Wick and Nat worked. He wanted this center to be fully equipped with modern medical devices and staffed with professional doctors to provide the best possible care for those in need. John aimed to ensure that the volunteers working at the charitable center would also receive free healthcare services, allowing them to work without worries about their health or financial constraints. The grand opening of the new medical facility was a day filled with joy and emotion for everyone involved. John, Wick, and Nat were all present at the ceremony, cutting the ribbon together to mark a new chapter in their journey of compassion. Their story became a powerful source of inspiration for the community, spreading love and kindness to many others. The true beauty of their journey lay not only in individual success but in the willingness to share and sacrifice to help others, even through small yet deeply meaningful actions. John looked back on his sonless journey, feeling a profound pride and fulfillment. He had entrusted Wick with not only an inheritance but also the responsibility to carry forward the values he had dedicated his life to building. Wick was now not only a worthy heir but also a mature man, one who knew how to care for others and was willing to work for the benefit of those around him. Together with Nat, they were not just a couple but also partners on a path to bring hope and happiness to those around them. The inauguration day ended with smiles and tears of joy. Wick embraced his father in gratitude, while Nat held his hand, both looking toward a bright future where they could continue their charitable work, helping those in need. John stood nearby, watching the young couple with a heart full of fulfillment. He knew that the career and values he had built were now being carried forward with purpose and commitment. This story is an emotional journey of growth and compassion, where a once cold man gradually discovered the true meaning of life through challenging experiences. It's not just a story about inheritance, but about the legacy of beautiful values in life of love, tolerance, and the power of kindness. Wick's transformation touched the hearts of many, showing the profound impact of small, simple acts in awakening a soul, spreading hope and happiness to others. It's a touching tale of compassion and social responsibility, where those with power and influence choose to use it to uplift their community, bringing meaning to their lives and those around them. The story concludes beautifully, not only with the transformation of one individual but with the lasting, positive impact they have on society, a wonderful lesson on the value of sharing. Our video ends here, so please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you for your support.